a kind of a law and an expectation that when he walks by, everybody has to stop and bow to him. So Haman, right, he gets in the king's ear and he says, you know what, like, we should make it a rule, a law, that when I walk by, people have to bow. When we walk by, people have to bow to us, you know? And he walks by one day, and there's a guy by the name of Mordecai. Now, Mordecai is Esther's cousin. Cousin was, you know, she was orphaned when she was a kid. Mordecai pretty much raised her. He's older. He's a very holy man, a devout man. And one day, Haman's walking by, and Mordecai does not bow. He just keeps praying. And Haman's like, what do you think you're doing? And Haman goes to the king and says, there's a group of people, and you know what? Like, they're not with us. They're not worshiping our God. They're not really worshiping you and giving us the honor we deserve. Give me the permission to hunt them down and kill them. And for whatever reason, you know, the king, okay, you know, the king says sure. Okay, he's not in his right mind. So Haman goes and builds these huge gallows, okay, so that he's going to execute an entire race. He's going to execute all the Jews, that they're going to swing from the gallows, and everyone's going to see him. If you've never read this story before, you're going, this sounds like Hitler. Yeah. It's that kind of genocide. It's that kind of idiocy. And you know, sometimes we think the Bible is just a nice book of cute stories. It's not. What ends up happening is he announces this decree, and basically Mordecai learns that all of his people are going to die. And he covers himself in ashes, and he sits in the middle of the street, and he starts praying out loud to God. And some of the people see him doing this, and they go back and they get word to Esther, and they say, you know that crazy old man, you know, Mordecai? You know, she's in the palace, and she's trying to keep it quiet that she's in Israel. She's trying to keep it quiet that she's Jewish. And they say, you know that crazy old man, you know? He's out in the street praying covered in ashes. Like, what's going on? And he gets word to her what's going on. And she actually comes in, and, you know, Esther, you know, they put a crown on her and these fine robes on her and stuff, and she's a beautiful one on the outside, but the truth is that she's a beautiful woman on the inside, and she loves God. And when she hears that this is going on, you can read about this in Esther. Esther, the queen, seized with anxiety after she heard what's going on, fled to the Lord. She took off the splendid apparel that she had. She put on garments of distress and mourning instead of costly perfumes. She covered her head with ashes. This is one of the places we get Ash Wednesday from, okay, as a reminder, an outward expression of her interior posture. I'm going to take off my fine robes, my fine perfume, and outwardly I'm going to show a sign of repentance. I'm going to show that I'm mortal. I'm going to die. God's my God. An outward expression of her interior posture. Listen what else she does. She utterly humbled her body. This is the queen doing this. Every part that she loved to adorn with jewelry, she covered with her tangled hair. As she lay on the earth, she said, blessed are you, help me who am alone, and I have no further help but you. She covered her head with ashes and with dung. She's going off. And you get to the next part, and she actually says to God, God, you have knowledge of all things, and you know that I hate the splendor of this wickedness. You know that I hate this sign of my proud position, that's the crown, which I wear upon my head. These days when I appear in public, I hate it. You know, I do not wear it when I don't have to. I do not wear it when I'm at leisure. And basically what she's going to God and saying, look, you put me in this position. I never asked for it. And we start to see the beauty of Esther is not external. Although she's beautiful on the outside, the beauty of Esther is internal. It says in 1 Samuel, God is not judged by your outward appearance. God judges by your heart. And while the world looks at us from the outside in, and Ahasuerus looked at Esther from the outside in, the reality is this. God looks at you like he looked at Esther from the inside out. And that's why if you look in the mirror, okay, and all you see is what you don't like about yourself, if you look in the mirror and you become your worst critic, I'm not pretty enough, I'm not tall enough, I'm not thin enough, I'm not big enough, I'm not strong enough, my acne or this or that, and you look in the mirror and you pick out all those things you don't like about yourself, that is not how God sees you. If you find yourself subconsciously and unconsciously comparing yourself to all those airbrushed toothpicks that are on every magazine cover and every checkout aisle, okay, you have fallen into the trap. You've fallen into the trap, and if you listen really carefully, you're going to hear that whisper of the serpent saying, do you trust him? He didn't say that. You can look this way. You can look that way. And we fall into that trap, and our friends fall into that trap, and it governs how we act, and it governs what we wear. A young lady, the Pope said one time about a young lady, she was, scantily clad, and she said, what's the problem? Am I saying too much because of how little she was wearing? Am I saying too much? And he looked back and said, no, my dear, you're not saying enough. You're not saying enough about your temple. You're not saying enough about your beauty, okay, by the way you're dressed. And Esther, through her prayer, shows, she says, God, I didn't want this. I never asked for this. You gave this to me. But Esther knew this. If she went to the king and spoke to him without being called, she could be killed. So now she has a dilemma. Do I take my life into my hands and go to my king? and speak and risk my own life? Or do I be quiet and watch my people get destroyed and live as a queen forever? And there was really no decision. You heard her prayer. She acted. And it was not her beauty, her external beauty, that got the king to act. It really is her internal beauty that moved his heart and his soul. And if you read the rest of the story, it's really amazing. She's actually very, very, very cunning. And she gets it so Haman comes to dinner. And Ahasuerus, her husband, and Haman are there. And it unfolds from there. And I'm not going to ruin the whole story for you. Well, yes, I will. At the very end of the story, Haman is going to be swinging from the very gallows that he had designed to destroy a race of people. Okay, a victim of his own hatred. And Esther showed her beauty from outside and ended up saving her people and her beloved Mordecai in the process. And as we move out of this time and the return, people like Esther, she has her own book. She's a heroine. A lot of times people will say, you know, women don't really have a strong place in Scripture. That's not true. It's just that oftentimes we don't know how to look. We don't know where to look. And there are women like Rachel who are sinful but who are prayerful. And there are women like Deborah who we never hear about but who are wise leaders. And there are women like Esther who is strong and who is courageous. And as they move out of this time of the return, and Greece comes into power now, and there's a guy you've probably heard of by the name of Alexander the Great. And Alexander the Great, pretty powerful guy. In fact, probably one of the greatest conquerors our world has ever known. Ever known. And in fact, he had advanced the kingdom, and he was going to Hellenize the world. And what does that mean, to Hellenize the world? It means everybody's going to be on the same page. Everybody's going to be Greek. They're going to speak Greek, and they're going to eat Greek, and they're going to read Greek, and they're going to communicate Greek, and they're going to worship Greek gods. And Alexander the Great had a pretty popular, pretty well-known tutor when he was 13. He went by the name of Aristotle. He's a pretty smart guy. And he wasn't the kind of leader that said, hey, okay, you guys are going to go over there to the right and go attack, and you're going to go to the left and attack. He just walks up and he goes, hey, everybody, follow me. And he gets on the horse and he just went. And he expanded the kingdom. He expanded the kingdom all the way to India. And it actually tells us that the only reason they didn't go into India is because the soldiers were going, we're tired. Can we just go back, get like a lemonade, you know? Enough of this conquering stuff. And what's interesting is that while Alexander was a brilliant military tactician, he didn't really pay attention to detail when it came to what was going to happen after he died. And he'd survived all these different battles. He ended up dying from a viral infection, okay? Hard to find those emergency rooms because they didn't have those pictures of the snakes on the staff, right? So before you know it, now he's dead, and his empire, his kingdom, is up for grabs. And you have the Seleucids and all these different people, and you can read about them as you go through. And as we get out of Nehemiah and the first Maccabees, you're going to hear all these names, and these names are hard to pronounce. Hard to pronounce. What's interesting, though, is as we go along, there's all these different factions of people, and they all kind of divide his empire. And for the most part, what they say to the Israelites is, you can stay here in Jerusalem. You can stay here, you can do your thing, as long as we both know that you're Greek. You can kind of do your thing. You can stay here. We're not going to force you out. We're not going to necessarily enslave you, but we're in control, and you got to act like a Greek, and that's going to mean worshiping like a Greek. And for a while, they kind of live at peace, and no one really pushes it. But over time, different leaders come in, and finally, under the Seleucids, a guy comes in who's an absolute maniac, and his name is Antiochus Epiphanes. As you move into the Maccabean revolt, you can read about Antiochus when he desecrates the temple, and this is in 1 Maccabees 4. Now what's interesting is, in our Catholic Bible, we have 1 Maccabees. But in the Protestant Bible, any of your non-Catholic brothers and sisters aren't going to have 1 Maccabees unless it's in a little section called the Apocrypha. Our Bible has 73 books. Their Bible has 66 books. It was at this time, as we were Hellenizing the world, okay, that we took all the Old Testament books and they were translated into Greek. It's what's called the Septuagint. And our Catholic Church uses the Septuagint, the Greek Septuagint, as our Old Testament, 46 books. But a few hundred years ago, during the Protestant Reformation, when Luther, who was a Catholic priest, protested the Catholic Church and his following, they went to the Hebrew Old Canon, the Hebrew Old Testament, instead of the Greek Old Testament. So they basically took books out of the Bible. And the very Bible we put together as a church that took us 400 years of prayer and discernment and different councils, stood by itself, 73 books for over 1,000 years. What ended up happening is people went in and said, we're not going to use the Greek, we're going to use the Hebrews. They took the books out. Sometimes you might be told, and this isn't an apologetics debate, sometimes you might be told from people, the Catholic Church added books to the Bible. You added books. The reality is no. We added nothing. The Bible was edited. People took books out of the Bible. The reality is this, is that if one of your friends is non-Catholic, if you start talking about Maccabees, it might not be in their Bible, they're going to say, you added books, you're going to say, no, you know what, I'm saying this in love. I didn't add books. You know, the other churches took the books out. You're reading the Bible that's edited for USA. I have the director's cut with all the special features. Okay? I'm saying this with love. Right? I'm saying this with love. And we should never have to debate. You should never be put on the defensive as a Catholic to say, you have to defend your faith. Where is that in the Bible? A lot of people will use that. Where is that in the Bible? Show me where that's in the Bible. Do you know what that is? That is anti-scriptural. That's anti-biblical. Because even the Bible itself says that it's not just about the written tradition, but it's about the written tradition and oral tradition. Okay? And it's not about defending your faith. You have nothing to defend. Archbishop Sheen once said, not 100 people in the world hate Catholicism, but there are millions who hate what they mistakenly believe Catholicism to be. Why do I mention this? Because the book of Maccabees is one of the 7 books that don't appear in the non-Catholic Bibles. And it's actually a pretty important book on a lot of levels. It's a bloody book. It's a book filled with war. But it bridges this gap when we're talking about the big story, right? The big salvation history story. So imagine what happens when you have this big story and you take out an important chunk. It doesn't really read the same way. It doesn't read the same way. And as we've moved through these periods, we move through the exile and the return and into the Maccabean revolt, and we have this orange flame for the rededication of the temple. And here's why. Antiochus Epiphanes, they take Jerusalem. They go into the Holy of Holies. He takes a pig and he slaughters it. They start erecting big, huge statues of Zeus. And they start worshiping false gods. And now they're trying to make a point. And they're going to go to a place, and they go to these small towns. They try and find these Hebrew families, Israelite families, who are really well known. They say, okay, if we can get them to worship our false gods, then everybody else will follow. And they go to a small town called Modin, about 20 miles outside of Jerusalem. And they find a family, the family of Mattathias. And they go to him and they say, we want you to sacrifice to this God. We want you to kneel down and sacrifice to a false god. And Mattathias says, no way. Now Mattathias has several sons. He says, I will not do that. And as a countryman goes forward, he's about to do it, Mattathias goes, whoosh, and it starts. The Maccabean revolt. The word Maccabees, his son Judas Maccabees, Simon Maccabees, Judas Maccabees, the word Maccabees means hammer. And it's at this point that he says, no more. And he drops the hammer. And for the next 40 years, there is bloodshed. Bloodshed. But in just a couple of years, in a few years, they actually take back the temple. This small band, outnumbered, outtrained, outmanned, don't have the same amount of weapons. They take it back. And they go into the temple, and they said, we are going to rededicate this to God. And you can read about it in 1 Maccabees 4. We're going to take back this temple. They rededicate it to God. But here's the problem. They only have enough oil for their lamps to burn for one night. So they take the oil and they start it. And that's why we have this orange period, the flame of the flame of the Maccabees, rededicating the temple. And here's the thing. It doesn't burn for one night. It ends up burning for 8 nights. And they feel that's a miracle, and it is. And that's why, to this day, we celebrate, our Jewish brothers and sisters celebrate the Maccabean revolt with a festival. And we call that festival Hanukkah. Which is why if you have Jewish friends, they have a menorah and it has 8 candles on it. And that's to represent the 8 days that same flame miraculously burned over one day of oil. And they've rededicated the temple. And in the Maccabees, we have yet one more example of faithfulness, one more example of courage. What does the word courage mean? When you act from your heart. Okay? If you are one with God, if God is your goal, if pride's not in the way, remember what pride is? Putting the will of yourself before the will of God. If God is who you're acting for, and you act from your heart, you will be victorious. Even if it doesn't look like it on the earth. Because they were victorious, they took it back over, but eventually Greece is going to falter, and Rome's going to come in as the power. And now, my brothers and sisters, we've gotten to that moment we've been waiting for. So as we wrap up this and move into our last segment, I want to ask you this question. I want you to be thinking about it. Why? We said in the beginning, we know the who, the what, the when, the where, the how. Why? Why did God do it this way? Couldn't he have done it another way? Look at all these people's names you've written down. Look at all this area. Look at all this time we've gone over. From the blue to the blood red, to the brown, to the green, to the purple, to the black, to the blue, to the yellow, to the orange. All these time periods, thousands of years. Why? Why did it have to be this way? We're going to come back to what's called the proto-evangelium. That was the promise in the garden. He's going to send a redeemer. We're going to find out is every one of those covenants, every one of those people's lives, every portrait up on that hall, every portrait, every moment, it's all pointing to this. It's all pointing to this main event. This is what we've been working the whole time for. So no matter where you're at, I want you to ask yourself that question. Why did God do it this way? Why did he come as Jesus Christ? And most specifically, why did he have to die on a cross? That is the question we're going to answer when we come back. We'll be right back.